My name is Isabel, or at least that's what I used to believe. Last Christmas, I walked into my parents' house expecting dry turkey, awkward silences, and the same tired traditions. But instead, my fiancé Lucas leaned close, pointed to one of my childhood photos, and whispered, "Don't you see it?" That moment split my life in two. What I thought were memories turned out to be carefully constructed lies. The woman I called mom for 3 decades may have stolen me, and the photos I smiled at every year. They were doctored like I'd been edited into a life that never belonged to me. I always wondered why I felt like a guest in my own family. Now I know. Before we dive in, I want to ask, where are you watching from, and how old are you? Don't forget to subscribe to TVH Stories for more powerful true-life revelations. Christmas at my parents' house always had a script. The same dried-out lamb, the same mismatched tablecloth that my mother swore was festive, and the same heavy silence under cheerful small talk. We all knew our roles. My sister Nina would wear something beige and expensive, swirling wine like it held all the answers. Her boyfriend, this year's version, would nod politely and pretend not to notice the tension. My father would ask about technology like it was invented yesterday. And my mother? She'd hum along to Mariah Carey while orchestrating the evening like a general, her weapon of choice, being nostalgia. That's what the photo albums were, her ammo. She always just happened to find them, though they'd been lined up on the same shelf since I was a teenager. She'd clap her hands like she'd surprised us and say I brought the albums out, and we'd all smile. Again. Pretend. Again. But that year was different. That year, I brought Lucas. My fiancé. Calm, observant, grounded Lucas. I thought he would be my anchor in the madness. I had no idea he'd be the earthquake. He sat next to me on the couch, while my mother flipped through the pages of birthdays, vacations, and holidays we were all supposed to remember fondly. I didn't look at the pictures. I never do. I watched Lucas. He was polite, of course, nodded, smiled, chuckled when she told the same story about me trying to eat sand on a beach trip. But then I saw something shift in him. His body tensed slightly, his shoulders drawing inward. His eyes squinted not in confusion but in examination, like a man adjusting a camera lens to bring a blurred detail into focus. He leaned closer to the page and tilted his head. That's how I knew something was wrong. That head tilt? It's what he does when something doesn't line up in a photo. A bad shadow. An awkward edit. Something artificial hiding in plain sight. And then, beneath the table, his hand found mine. He squeezed firm and sudden. I looked at him, waiting for him to say something. He didn't look at me, just kept scanning the page. "Don't you see it?" he whispered. His voice was calm but sharp, like a needle under the skin. "See what I asked?" Barely mouthing the words. He didn't answer. Just dropped my hand and returned to watching my mom flip the next page. She moved on to a picture of me feeding a pine cone to a cat. Everyone laughed. I didn't. My heart was racing. My mouth was dry. I tried to follow along, pretend nothing had shifted, but I felt like I was looking at my life through glass, distorted, distant, not mine. I leaned in again, asked Lucas what he meant. He shook his head, eyes still on the album. "I'll explain later," he said. And with that, he resumed playing along while I sat frozen beside him, my whole childhood suddenly feeling like a lie printed on glossy paper. Lucas didn't say another word about the photos until we were halfway home. The ride was quiet, save for the sound of tires slicing through damp asphalt and the occasional hum of the heater trying to battle the December cold. I stared straight ahead, clutching my coat tighter, replaying the moment he whispered, "Don't you see it?" over and over in my mind. I wanted to ask again, demand answers, but something told me to wait. His grip on the steering wheel was tighter than usual. His jaw clenched in that quiet way he gets when he's thinking hard, like building a theory in his head piece by piece. Then, without warning, he reached into the inner pocket of his coat and pulled out a few loose photographs. "I took these," he said, eyes still on the road. "From the stack next to the albums. I needed time to really look." He handed them to me one by one. The first was one I recognized. Me, maybe 6 or 7, standing in front of a stone wall wearing a pink coat and smiling. I'd seen that photo dozens of times. It was burned into my memory. "What about it?" I asked. He didn't answer. Just passed me another. And another. My hands shook slightly as I flipped through them. All different locations, one near a swing, set another by a fountain, another in front of a wooden fence. But in each one, my face was the same. Not just similar. The same. Same smile. Same angle. Same shadows under my chin. The expression hadn't changed by a single muscle. "It's copy-pasted," he said quietly. "That's not a real sequence of photos. That's the same image of your face placed on different backgrounds." I stared harder. I didn't want to believe it. But the more I looked, the more it became impossible to ignore. The lighting on my face didn't match the surroundings. My expression was frozen in a way that didn't feel human. My smile looked like a mask glued on. "Why would they do that?" I whispered. Lucas didn't reply. Instead, he handed me a final photo. It was of a baby. Pale skin, light brown hair, rounder face. I felt something cold crawl up my spine. "That's not me," I said slowly. "No," he said. "I don't think they ever had baby pictures of you." I couldn't stop staring at the photo, trying to force it to become familiar. But it didn't. It was a stranger's baby photo labeled as mine for as long as I could remember. Then came the last one. Me, supposedly, standing with my mom and dad in front of some old government building. But my outline was fuzzy. The shadows didn't line up. It looked like someone had peeled a sticker halfway off and never smoothed it back down. I stared at it for a long time before I laughed. Not a real laugh, but the kind that slips out when your mind cracks under too much weight. "So I'm a collage," I said. "That's fun." Lucas didn't laugh. He just kept driving while I sat in silence, holding the fragments of a life that suddenly didn't look like mine at all. I didn't sleep that night. Lucas drifted off sometime after midnight, his breathing slow and steady beside me, but I stayed sitting up in bed with the photos spread out across the nightstand, like evidence in a case I never meant to open. I kept checking them as if maybe something had changed while I wasn't looking, as if the truth might reverse itself and give me back the comfort of ignorance. But it didn't. My face, copied, pasted, replicated across scenes, was still frozen in that expression I didn't remember making. The baby with the wrong face was still smiling in a crib I'd never seen. And in that staged photo in front of the building, I still looked like a cutout hovering in a life that wasn't mine. The thing about denial is that it doesn't break all at once. It seeps in. It leaks like an old pipe under the sink, drip, 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 until one day the floor gives out from under you. That night, sitting in bed, surrounded by still images of lies, I felt it. A whisper, not a scream, but sharp enough to cut through every excuse I'd ever told myself. I had no idea where I came from. Not metaphorically. Literally. I had no memories before the age of 5. None. That had always struck me as odd, but I'd buried it beneath logic. Childhood amnesia. Trauma. The war. I grew up with explanations that sounded good on paper. My parents, no. The people who raised me always said I was too young to remember the worst of it. "Your mind was protecting itself," they told me. "You've always been strong." And I believed them. Because the alternative. The alternative was terrifying. That maybe my life hadn't started the way they said. That maybe it had been taken, not given. That night, pieces started coming back, flickering like half-lit rooms in a long-abandoned house. A hallway buzzing with fluorescent lights. My mother, no, not her, the woman who raised me, bending down and whispering in a language I hadn't understood then, but now I recognized. Serbian. "Smile," she had said. They need to like you. I remembered a clipboard, a man behind glass, the smell of lemon cleaner and cold air. Immigration. That was my first real memory. Not a birthday party. Not a teddy bear or lullaby. No cake. Just paperwork and performance. From there, things fell into place, but not the way puzzle pieces do. This was messier, jagged. My lunches in grade school always had perfectly folded napkins, but never a note. My mom. No, she's not my mom. Never kissed my cheek. My dad always read the newspaper like he was angry at it. And I was always told I was independent, low maintenance, the kind of kid who never needed anything. That wasn't praise. That was justification. An excuse for detachment. For keeping a distance I never understood until now. I wasn't raised. I was managed. Cared for just enough to pass inspection. That realization didn't make me cry. It made me cold. Because deep down, I think I'd always known. But until Lucas handed me those pictures, I'd never had the proof. I don't know how long I sat at the kitchen table staring at the photographs. Morning light had started to bleed through the window blinds when something inside me finally gave way. A memory didn't just appear. It rose slow and heavy, like something surfacing from deep water. At first, it didn't feel like mine. It was too clear, too vivid, like a scene from someone else's life. A woman different from the one who raised me stood in a sunlit room. She had soft, dark eyes and smelled faintly of citrus. She held my hand in hers and spoke to me in a voice that made my chest ache with familiarity. Another woman entered the room, younger, smiling too hard. "This is your babysitter," the citrus-scented woman said in Serbian. That was the first time I met her. The woman I would later call Mom. Another flash. I was crying, pulling on a coat too big for me. My fists balled up, my chest tight. I said something. I wanted Mama. I wanted the first woman. Then a hand gripped my shoulder hard. "Don't say that again," a voice warned. "If you talk about her, you disappear." That phrase, so brutal, so final, had been buried deep, locked away behind years of smiles and rehearsed stories. But I remembered it now. The threat didn't just silence me then, it silenced everything after. Then came the scream. Not from my mouth, but from inside my body. I was in a bed that didn't feel like mine, in a house that didn't smell right, kicking at sheets that felt foreign. I called for her, for the woman who smelled like oranges and safety, but she never came. Instead, another voice, colder, said simply, "Enough." I don't remember what happened next. I must have blacked out or shut down. But when I came to, I was on the kitchen floor, palms flat against the cold tiles, like I was trying to hold on to the earth itself. My heart pounded in my throat. My breath stuttered in and out like a car on an icy road. I didn't know if I was crying or just stuck in a loop of soundless panic. Lucas found me there. He crouched beside me, reached out slowly, but I flinched. So he just sat with me, quiet, present, solid. Somewhere in the middle of that storm, I reached for my phone. My fingers trembled so badly I could barely dial. But I did. And when the 911 operator answered, I heard my own voice say words I didn't know I had the courage to speak. "I think I've been kidnapped." There was silence on the other end. Then a calm voice asked, "Are you safe right now?" I didn't know how to answer. Because in that moment, everything I thought was safe, my home, my memories, my family, had become suspect. But I said yes. I was breathing. I was alive. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't pretending anymore. Lucas took the phone from my hands when my voice gave out. His tone was calm, measured the way he always gets when things fall apart. He told the operator that I'd just remembered something traumatic, possibly criminal. That it had started with strange photos, missing documents, inconsistencies in my childhood. That I believed I'd been abducted around age 5. He didn't sound hysterical. He sounded certain. The operator asked for our address and said they'd be opening a welfare check and forwarding the case to the investigative unit. "You'll be contacted soon," she said. "If anything feels unsafe before that, call us back." Lucas hung up and sat beside me, his hand hovering just above mine, not quite touching but close enough to remind me I wasn't alone. I still couldn't speak. My body felt foreign, like I was borrowing it temporarily while my real self screamed behind glass. I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I showered. I folded laundry I don't remember starting. I emptied the dishwasher with shaking hands. The apartment buzzed softly as if the walls were humming indifferent to the storm inside me. Lucas made tea. He watched me like I might shatter if he blinked. "You should rest," he said. I nodded but didn't move. I kept expecting something to happen, someone to knock down the door or for the floor to give out beneath me. Instead, the world stayed still, and in that stillness, I waited. The next morning, I received an email. The subject line read, "Case file opened." There was a number, a contact name, and a note saying I would be hearing from an assigned officer. I showed it to Lucas. He read it twice and nodded. "It's real now," he said. That word "real" hit differently, because all my life I had accepted things without questioning them. I had memorized the lines of a story someone else wrote for me. Now I was holding the first page of a different one. 2 days later, I heard 3 soft knocks at the door. I opened it, and there they were, my mother and father, or the people I had called those names. She was holding a brown paper bag like she'd come to deliver cookies. My dad stood just behind her, hands buried in his coat pockets, expression unreadable. "Can we come in?" she asked, stepping forward before I answered. Lucas appeared beside me, silent. I let them in. They sat on the couch like guests, awkward and stiff. She placed the bag on the table. "I brought some of that carrot soup you like," she said. "From when you were sick that time." I remembered that soup. I'd been 8. She'd told me to stop crying because I wasn't dying. That soup. I didn't say thank you. She looked around the apartment like the furniture might help her figure out what to say. Finally, she spoke. "We talked to the police. They said you filed a report." I nodded. "You should have come to us first," she said. "Would you have told me the truth, Silence?" And then finally she said it. "You're not biologically ours." And just like that, the final thread snapped. The story I'd clung to was over. Now the truth would begin. They didn't cry. They didn't beg. They sat there like this was a conversation we'd been meaning to have over coffee. My mother, no, the woman I once believed was. My mother crossed her legs and adjusted the sleeve of her coat. My father remained standing, his arms folded like he was waiting for a bus, not admitting to a lifetime of deception. "You're not biologically ours?" she repeated, her voice flat, practiced. I felt nothing at first. Or maybe I felt too much to sort it out. A strange calm settled in my chest, the kind of quiet you get after a fire has already done its damage. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" I asked. Her lips twitched like she wanted to appear sad but couldn't quite summon it. "We didn't want to hurt you." Lucas stepped closer, arms crossed, eyes locked on them. "So it's true. Everything. The photos. The edits. The silence." My father finally spoke. "Yes." One word. Heavy. Final. I stared at him, trying to trace the man I thought I knew in the lines of his face. I couldn't find him. "Your real mother," she began, "was very young. She couldn't care for you. She begged us to take you." "Begged," I repeated. "She wanted you to have a better life," she added quickly. "We were leaving the country." She wasn't. It was war. She knew what that meant. "Where is she now?" I asked. My father looked to the window. My mother folded her hands in her lap. "We don't know," she said. "You never tried to find her." She looked up sharply. It was complicated. Lucas's voice cut in, cool and direct. "Why fake the photos?" My father didn't flinch. "We didn't want her to feel like she didn't belong." So you erased her life? Lucas asked. Invented a new one. You cried for her for weeks. My mother snapped her composure, cracking. It was awful. But you adjusted. You forgot. I didn't forget, I said. You buried it. You would have hated us, she said. You think I don't? Silence. Cold and clean. Then she reached into the bag and pulled out a photo. I didn't take it. I didn't even look. This one's real, she said. You were 6. We were at the embassy. That doesn't make it okay, I said. That just makes it documented. My father looked at Lucas, then at me. We didn't steal you, he said. We rescued you. I almost laughed. Rescued. As if they had pulled me from a fire, not dragged me from someone's arms and rewrote my name like a misfiled report. And yet, for a few seconds, I wanted to believe them. I wanted to wrap myself in the comfort of that lie. But it didn't fit anymore. It never really had. Tell me her name, I said. My mother blinked. What? Her name. My mother. The woman you took me from. My father rubbed his face, exhaling like my very presence exhausted him. You were 5, she said. Your memories aren't reliable. Try me. They hesitated. Then quietly he said it. Mara Petrovich. The sound settled in the room like smoke. The truth was finally here, and it had a name. They left after that. No apology. No tears. Just the paper bag with the soup still sitting untouched on my coffee table. As they walked out, my father gave me a final glance, something between fatigue and accusation, like I was the one who'd fractured the family. Lucas closed the door behind them and locked it. The click echoed louder than I expected. For a moment, we just stood there. Still. Quiet. I stared at the name they'd given me, Mara Petrovich, rolling it over in my mind like a stone I wasn't sure I wanted to carry. It didn't sound familiar. It didn't feel like mine. But neither did anything else. That night, Lucas and I sat across from each other with our laptops open. No TV, no music. Just the glow of 2 screens and the sound of typing. We searched every variation we could think of. Mara Petrovich, Maria Petrovich, M. Petrovic. Some names led to dead ends. A retired gym teacher in Belgrade, a florist in Novi Sad, a cooking blogger who hadn't posted since 2012. Each time we found a face that didn't match mine, I felt something in me loosen, disappointment maybe, or relief. I wasn't sure which was worse. Then Lucas paused. This one, he said. I looked at his screen. A grainy Facebook profile. No smile, no filters, no background music. Just a woman in her early 50s with dark hair pulled back and faint lines around her mouth. She looked tired. Honest. Familiar. My breath caught. I leaned in closer. Lucas didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The resemblance was sharp. Not in the obvious way, not the kind you'd see in side-by-side baby photos. This was something else. The shape of the jaw. The arch of the eyebrows. The stillness in the eyes. She looks like you, Lucas said quietly. I shook my head. No, I look like her. It wasn't just a similarity. It was a mirror I hadn't known existed. She hadn't posted in months, but her location was listed southern Serbia. A town I vaguely remembered hearing once when I was a kid, a word my mother had accidentally let slip during an argument and then immediately brushed off. That's not important, she had said back then. Now it felt like the key to everything. We drafted a message. Lucas helped with the translation. He checked the wording 3 times to make sure it sounded respectful, clear, human. I stared at the screen as we typed it. Hello, I was given your name. I think I might be your daughter. We sent it. I didn't know what I expected, silence maybe, or confusion. But the reply came the next morning. 1 line. Can we talk? We scheduled a video call. Lucas handled the logistics. I sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket, feeling like I was about to meet a ghost I hadn't realized I'd been mourning. When her face appeared, it was like time paused. She stared at me, hand to her mouth, eyes wide, and then she whispered my name. Not Isabel. Milena. And somehow it didn't sound strange. It sounded like coming home. She said my name again. Milena, and I felt something shift in my chest. It wasn't recognition exactly. The name didn't trigger any specific memory, but it settled over me like a garment I hadn't worn in years, still shaped to fit my body. Did you give me up? I asked. My voice was tight, fragile. Her face changed, not dramatically, but in a way that made it clear the question hurt. No, she said, her voice low. God, no. She looked off screen for a second as if grounding herself. Then she began. You were 5. I had to go to the municipal office to finalize some resettlement papers. I left you with a neighbor I trusted, just for a couple of hours. When I came back, you were gone. She paused. I could hear her breathing. They said she left earlier than expected, that you went with her. But I never saw you again. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. It wasn't a performance. It was the kind of grief that had calcified over decades. I went to every police station, she said. Every refugee camp. I posted flyers. I asked strangers in line if they'd seen a little girl with dark eyes and a red scarf. They all said the same thing: children disappeared during war. She looked back at me, blinking slowly. But I knew. I knew you hadn't just wandered off. Lucas sat next to me, silent, his hand lightly on my back. He was steady, grounding me without pulling me out of the moment. Did you ever try to leave? He asked gently. She nodded. I was approved for the U.S. resettlement program, but only for families with children. After you disappeared, I was removed from the list. Her voice cracked just slightly. Not that I would have left without you. And then the realization hit me. Not as a question, but as a certainty. That was why. That was the reason they took me. Not because they loved me. Not because they couldn't bear to leave me behind. They took me because I was their ticket out. I was leverage. Proof. A prop in a narrative that bought them a future. The photos. The name change. The fake birthday parties. They weren't misguided parenting decisions. They were evidence of a calculated theft. They built a life on my disappearance. I felt my body tense, heat rising behind my eyes, but I didn't cry. I couldn't afford to, not yet. I don't know what to say, I told her. She smiled, faint and trembling. You don't have to say anything. You're here. That's more than I hoped for. I wanted to ask her 100 things. What I was like as a toddler. What lullabies she sang. What my favorite food was. But all I could say was, they changed my name. I know, she said. Milena was your grandmother's name. She would have loved you. I nodded slowly. I didn't feel rage or even sadness. I felt hollow, like someone had reached inside me and scooped everything out, then politely stitched the skin closed so no one would notice. But this, her face, her voice, her truth, this was real. And for the first time in my life, so was I. 2 weeks later, we stood side by side at the precinct. She wore a navy coat, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched her purse. I had the photos in a manila envelope, the doctored ones, the one of the baby who wasn't me, and the embassy picture that had always felt too clean. We handed everything over. The officer on duty took our statements, asked questions that felt surreal, to answer dates, locations, names that had lived only in the quiet corners of my memory. My mother, my real mother, unfolded a creased flyer from her bag. It was yellowed, worn soft at the edges like a blanket. A missing person notice. My name, Milena Petrovich, was printed at the top, beneath a grainy photo of a child with wide, unsure eyes. This is her, she told the officer. This is my daughter. He didn't question her. He didn't ask for more proof. He just nodded, took the file, and told us someone would be in touch. I didn't cry then either. I'd learned to stay composed even when the ground shifted under me. But something about hearing someone else, someone not bound to me by blood or trauma, confirm that I existed, that I was real, did something to me. It loosened a knot I didn't know had been choking me for years. We pressed charges: immigration fraud, falsifying federal documents, concealing a child abduction across international borders. It didn't take long for the authorities to uncover the truth. My adoptive parents, if I could even call them that, had never surrendered their Serbian passports. They'd kept them hidden in a locked drawer along with forged documents showing me as their child. They had used me, not just to leave the country, but to build an entire identity, a whole life on top of the lie. Their American citizenship was revoked. There was no trial, no drawn-out court drama. The evidence was overwhelming, the motive clear. They were deported within 6 months. No appeals, no second chances, and they can never come back. I didn't attend the hearing. I didn't need to see them escorted out of the courtroom or onto a plane. I didn't need to watch them fall. I had already seen everything I needed to. I had seen their carefully crafted world unravel, not with a scream, but with a quiet collapse, like a stage set being dismantled after the final show. Nah, my younger sister, at least by legal record, stayed behind. She was born here after all. For weeks, she said nothing. Just silence, avoidance, averted eyes. Then one afternoon, she knocked on my door, stood in my hallway for a long time without speaking. Finally, she said, "That was really messed up." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. We talk more now than we ever did growing up. She still makes her coffee too strong and forgets to return texts, but she remembers how I take mine with cream, no sugar. And maybe that counts for something. Maybe that means we're not done writing our story yet. After the case closed and the paperwork settled, everything went quiet. No more calls from investigators, no more updates, no more nightmares about being pulled into a stranger's car. The people who raised me were gone, out of the country, out of my life. And I didn't feel guilty. I felt free. For the first time, I could look in the mirror and not wonder who I was pretending to be. I was Melina, and that name, which once felt foreign and heavy, now felt like a door creaking open to something real. My mother, my real mother, moved to the US 6 months after the ruling. Lucas and I helped her with the reunification paperwork. It was easier than expected. She had waited so long for something that in the end came together with a few signatures and a stamp. Life rarely gives that kind of justice. She got a small apartment 2 blocks from ours and found a job at a local bakery. She said it reminded her of the one she worked at when she was 21, before war, before loss, before everything that fractured her life. I visited her often. At first, it was awkward. Not because I didn't want to be there, but because neither of us knew how to fill in the time that had been taken. We didn't talk about the gap. We talked about the now, how she still baked bread by feel-not recipe, how I couldn't stand the smell of oranges anymore, how both of us liked rainy days because they made silence easier to share. Then one day she came to my apartment holding a white envelope. She had tears in her eyes before she even opened her mouth. "What's this?" I asked. "Your wedding invitation," she said softly. Lucas dropped it off. "I just wanted you to know I got it." I didn't expect her to cry, but she did. Not loud, not performative, just quiet tears, as if the invitation wasn't just to a ceremony, but to a life she never thought she'd be part of again. She folded it back into the envelope and held it close. "Thank you," she whispered, "for letting me come." "You're not letting yourself in," I said. "You're being welcomed back." She nodded but didn't speak. We stood there for a while, no words between us. None needed. The people who took me, who crafted a version of me they could parade around like proof of their own goodness, had been stripped of everything. But the truth is, they never had me to begin with. They had a version, a shadow, a stand-in. When that collapsed, all they were left with was the lie, and I finally had the truth. Not the kind that shouts or demands vengeance, the quiet kind, the kind that allows you to sleep at night without wondering who you were supposed to be. We're planning the wedding now. Lucas wants a small ceremony. I want pie instead of cake. My mother offered to make both. I said yes. Not because I needed her to prove anything, but because she already had. By staying, by showing up, and by finally calling me by my real name. The strange thing about healing is how quiet it is. No dramatic music, no thunderclaps, just the small everyday moments that begin to feel different. Mornings weren't so heavy anymore. I stopped flinching when I walked past mirrors. I even found myself humming some mornings, usually without realizing it. And yet, there were reminders sharp and sudden. Like when I filled out a health insurance form and hesitated at the line asking for mother's maiden name. Which one did they mean? The one who packed my lunches, or the one who had her name erased? It was strange navigating a world that still operated by the rules of my old life when I no longer belonged to it. I wasn't sure I belonged to the new one yet either. My therapist said that made sense. That transition wasn't linear, that the body remembers what the mind can't, that the wounds left by stolen identity by fabricated childhoods leave echoes even after the facts are known. I didn't argue. I just kept showing up, talking, listening, remembering. Sometimes the memories came back in full color like the first time I walked into the old immigration building where my earliest memory lived. It was smaller than I remembered. The hallway was narrower, the lights dimmer. I stood there for a long time imagining the little girl in the red scarf being told to smile for a clipboard. I imagined what it felt like to disappear, and I realized I didn't have to imagine. I had lived it. Other memories returned in flashes. A woman handing me a small orange, the warmth of a wool blanket that smelled like fresh dough. A lullaby hummed low and slow, the words lost to time, but the melody lodged somewhere behind my ribs. I told Lucas everything. Every time I remembered something new, he listened. No interruptions. No wow or that's crazy. Just space. Just presence. And that more than anything helped me find my footing. Then one afternoon, while I was organizing a drawer I hadn't touched since before Christmas, I found something. A photo. One I didn't recognize. It had been tucked inside an old birthday card. I pulled it out carefully as if it might crumble. It was me, maybe 4, maybe 5, standing in a garden I didn't recognize. The lighting was natural. My hair was a little longer. And my face. It was different. Not in the physical features, but in the expression. I wasn't smiling. I wasn't performing. I looked curious. A little wary. But I was real. Not cropped, not edited, not manipulated. I held that photo in my hands for nearly an hour. Lucas found me there and didn't say anything. He just sat down beside me. It's the only one, I said quietly. The only one that feels like me. He nodded. Then we frame it. So we did. I put it on my desk. A reminder that before the lies, before the erasure, there was a version of me that still existed. She was quiet, but she had survived, and now she was ready to live. The wedding was still a few months away, but we'd started planning. Not because we wanted the perfect event, but because we needed something that belonged to us. Something that no one could rewrite or steal or stage for someone else's benefit. We chose a small venue near a lake, nothing extravagant, just quiet and natural. I didn't want anything that reminded me of the overproduced birthdays my adoptive mother used to organize the ones that felt more like press events than celebrations. I wanted something real, something soft. One afternoon, my mother, my real one, joined me for coffee at a quiet place around the corner. She wore a pale scarf and had flour on her sleeves from her shift at the bakery. She looked content in the way people do when life stops fighting them. We sat outside under a gray sky, the kind of light that makes everything look a little more honest. "Do you want to walk me through the ceremony plans?" she asked, stirring her tea. I smiled. "You sure it's mostly me obsessing over chairs and string lights? I want to hear all of it." So I did. I told her about the color palette, the pie bar instead of cake, the handwritten place cards Lucas insisted on making himself. I told her we'd chosen a song for the first dance that neither of us had history with, something new, unclaimed, completely ours. She listened the whole time, nodding, eyes bright. And then she reached across the table and took my hand. "You're building a life that's honest," she said. "That's all I ever wanted for you." It hit harder than I expected. Maybe because no one had ever said that to me before. Not without strings or expectations. Not without control. Just a simple, unconditional hope. I nodded, swallowing the lump rising in my throat. "I just wish you could have been there when I was little." She didn't flinch. "Me too," she said. "Every day." We didn't stay long. The air turned colder and the sky threatened rain. But on the walk back, she paused outside her building and turned to me. "You know, I used to dream about what kind of person you'd become," she said. "I imagined you bold, kind, smart, but I never imagined this much strength." I didn't know what to say, so I hugged her. Tightly. Not as a gesture, but as something deep and necessary. We stayed like that until the streetlights came on. Later that night, back home, I opened a box I hadn't touched since my childhood bedroom was packed up. Inside were all the trophies and certificates and carefully arranged photos that had once been used to prove my life was on track. I took one look at them and realized none of them mattered. Not because they weren't real, but because they weren't mine. I closed the box, slid it under the bed, and pulled out the framed photo Lucas and I had hung earlier, the one of little me, unfiltered and unsmiling, holding a yellow flower. I stared at it, not with sadness, but with recognition. She had waited a long time to be seen, and now finally, I was ready to look. About a month before the wedding, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a message through some distant relative, but a real envelope with my name written in delicate, looping cursive I didn't recognize. It had no return address, just a postmark from overseas. I held it for a while before opening it. I don't know what I expected, an apology, a warning, maybe some pathetic attempt at closure, but what I found was colder than that. It was from her. The woman who raised me, 2 pages handwritten. The tone wasn't bitter. It wasn't warm either. It was clinical, like a report drafted by someone trying to justify a failed experiment. She didn't say sorry. Not once. She explained. How the war had left them desperate. How my real mother had seemed unstable. How they'd only planned to take me temporarily, but once they arrived in the States, they feared returning me would make things worse. "We gave you a better life," she wrote. "We protected you from chaos, from poverty, from instability." She used the word rescued again, as if repeating it could make it true. The final paragraph stunned me most. She said she still believed what they did was right, that if given the chance, she would do it again. That love sometimes looks like survival. I read it twice, then folded it back into the envelope. I didn't show Lucas right away. I needed to sit with it alone. It didn't make me cry. It didn't even make me angry. It just confirmed what I already knew: they never saw me as a person. I was a project, a vessel, a means to an end. Love was never in the equation, just need. Lucas came home later that evening and found me sitting at the kitchen counter, the letter beside a half-finished mug of tea. He didn't ask questions. He just waited. "She wrote," I said finally. "From where?" "No idea. There's no return address." I handed it to him. He read it once, then again, slowly, like he was trying to make sense of something that refused to be logical. "She still thinks she did the right thing," he said. I nodded. "That's the worst part." He placed the letter down gently, then looked at me. You don't have to carry this. I'm not, I said. Not anymore. But I needed to see it. To know that even if she came back, even if she stood in front of me and said everything again to my face, it wouldn't change anything. Because you already know who you are now. I smiled faintly. Yeah, I do. We burned the letter that night. Not as a dramatic gesture, not as revenge, but as a quiet act of release. We stood on the balcony watching the flame curl the pages into ash. There was no anger in me, just finality. Some ghosts don't leave until you stop feeding them. I wasn't going to keep hers alive any longer. I was done being someone else's version of me. The only story that mattered now was the one I was writing for myself. The week before the wedding, I changed my name legally. It wasn't dramatic. No tears in front of a judge, no ceremonial declaration. Just a quiet visit to the courthouse, a few notarized forms, and a signature that felt heavier than all the paperwork combined. I had debated it for weeks. Isabel was the name they gave me, the name attached to my school records, my driver's license, the childhood photos that now felt like museum forgeries. But Milena, that was the name whispered by the woman who had searched for me across decades and continents. That was the name printed on a crumpled missing person flyer. That was the name that came before the edits. I stood in front of the mirror later that day and said it out loud. Milena, not just as a correction but as a reclamation, a flag planted firmly in the soil of my own story. Lucas met me outside the building. He didn't say anything when I handed him the new ID card. He just smiled and squeezed my hand. That night we made dinner together, nothing fancy, just pasta and red sauce and garlic bread. My mother came over bringing a bottle of wine and a small weathered box wrapped in blue ribbon. She waited until we'd eaten, then slid it across the table toward me. I wasn't sure if this would still be with me, she said, but I kept it. All these years. I opened it slowly. Inside were tiny keepsakes, pieces of a life I had almost lost. A beaded bracelet with my name spelled out in Serbian. A faded drawing on torn paper. A photo of us, her holding me in her lap, both of us squinting at the sun. I stared at it for a long time. My hands trembled, but not from fear, from recognition. It wasn't edited. It wasn't cropped. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. I looked up at her. I didn't think anything like this still existed. I didn't think I'd ever get to give it to you, she replied. We sat there in silence for a while. The kind that isn't awkward, just full. Lucas cleared the dishes and left us to talk. Do you ever wish I had come back sooner? I asked. She shook her head. I wish I had never let you out of my sight. But no, Melina. You came back when you were ready. And I'm here now. I leaned over and hugged her. Longer than usual, tighter. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a visitor in someone else's life. I felt like a daughter. Later when she left, I sat with the box in my lap and breathed deeply. I didn't need to chase memories anymore. They were here. With me. I didn't need to earn my name. I had claimed it. I didn't need the past to be fixed. It just had to be faced. And I had done that. Quietly. Without spectacle. But fully. And now I was ready to walk into the next chapter, not as a mystery to be solved, but as a woman finally truly whole. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was nervous. Not because I was unsure. But because I was wide awake with a sense of calm that felt almost too big for my body. I lay in bed listening to the faint hum of the city outside, Lucas asleep beside me, and thought about how far I'd come from that cold December evening when everything fell apart over a photo album. I remembered the woman I was back then, unsure, floating, trying to smile her way through the weight of being misplaced. I didn't pity her. I didn't resent her. I just understood her now. She hadn't been weak. She'd been waiting. Waiting for someone to say, "Don't you see it?" Waiting for the lie to crack just enough for the truth to slip through. Morning came quietly. No drama, no chaos. Just light, spilling through the curtains and the soft tap of my mother arriving with a thermos of tea and a scarf she thought would look nice for my walk down the aisle. She didn't fuss. She didn't hover. She just sat with me on the couch while I did my makeup, both of us stealing glances in the mirror, as if still adjusting to the sight of each other in this version of life. "You look like her," she said at one point. I turned. "Who?" "My mother. Your grandmother. The same eyes when you're focused. The same quiet when you're thinking." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The ceremony was exactly as we wanted, small under open sky, just enough chairs for those who mattered. Lucas stood at the end of the aisle looking like a man who had waited his whole life for this moment and still couldn't believe it had arrived. I walked toward him slowly, the gravel path crunching under my shoes, the breeze lifting strands of hair I'd stopped trying to tame. My mother sat in the front row, hands clasped in her lap, eyes shimmering but steady. And in that moment, everything felt right. Not perfect life rarely is, but aligned, balanced, honest. We didn't do vows we'd written. We just looked at each other and said what we meant. I promised to keep building something that felt like home. He promised to always leave space for the truth, even when it was hard. We kissed. The guests clapped. The trees swayed like they'd been listening the whole time. Later at the reception, there were toasts, laughter, too much pie. My mother danced with me once slowly without any music, just her whispering something in Serbian I didn't fully understand, but didn't need translated. Na came too. She didn't speak much, but she hugged me longer than she ever had growing up. "You did good," she said. "All of it. You did good." That night, after everyone left, I stood barefoot on the balcony and watched the stars. Lucas came out, handed me a blanket, and pulled me into his arms. Still awake, he asked. "Yeah," I whispered, but not restless. "Just here." He nodded. "Then we're exactly where we should be." And we were. Finally. After the wedding, life didn't suddenly transform into a fairy tale. There were still bills to pay, laundry to fold, mornings when I forgot to eat breakfast. But everything felt different, not because the world had changed, but because I had. I wasn't living under a false name anymore. I wasn't walking through someone else's version of my life. I was here, present, real. And I had people around me who saw me that way too. My mother came over more often. She'd bring leftover pastries from the bakery and stories from her childhood, ones I hadn't grown up hearing, but felt like they belonged to me anyway. Sometimes we'd talk for hours. Sometimes we just sat in silence, both of us, knowing there was nothing to fix, just time to share. One afternoon, Na showed up unannounced. She stood in the doorway holding 2 coffees and a box of donuts. "Didn't know if you'd want to see me?" she said. I let her in without hesitation. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I had once tried to convince myself my entire childhood wasn't unraveling. "I've been thinking a lot," she said, tearing a piece of her donut, not looking up. "About everything. About what they did." I didn't interrupt. "You know, growing up, I always thought you were the distant one," she continued. "But now I see it differently. You weren't distant. You were surviving." That hit harder than I expected. Not because it was new, but because it was the first time someone in my old life had said it out loud. "I didn't know how to help you," she said. "I was just a kid. But I'm not anymore." I nodded, unsure of what to say. "You don't owe me anything," I finally replied. "I know," she said, "but I still want to show up." And she did. Slowly, imperfectly, but consistently. She started texting more, dropping by with things she thought I'd like, asking questions instead of assuming answers. She wasn't trying to erase what had happened. She was just trying to be part of what came next, and that mattered more than I could explain. I found myself revisiting the past in new ways, not out of pain, but out of curiosity. I reached out to a few organizations that specialized in international child recovery and wrongful adoption cases. I didn't want revenge. I wanted understanding. I wanted to know how many others had stories like mine, buried under polite silence and legal gray areas. I offered to share my story anonymously. A woman named Teresa, who worked with a support network for war-displaced families, asked if I'd be willing to do an interview. I agreed. We met at a small library downtown. No cameras, just her a notebook and a recorder. I told her everything from the photo album to the name change to the wedding. When I finished, she looked at me and said, "You're not just someone who found her way home. You're someone who stayed." I'd never thought about it like that. But she was right. I hadn't just survived. I hadn't just uncovered the truth. I'd chosen to live in it. And that, more than anything, was the quietest kind of power I had ever known. Teresa's article came out 2 weeks later. It was published in a small online journal focused on diaspora and trauma recovery. She kept her word: no names, no locations, no identifiers. But the story was unmistakably mine. She titled it, "The Girl Who Remembered Too Late." I read it slowly, each sentence landing like a steady heartbeat. It didn't sensationalize anything. It didn't paint me as a victim or a heroine. It simply told the truth. The truth about a child taken alive, fabricated a woman who clawed her way back through memory and silence. I shared it with my mother. She cried while reading it, but not from pain, more like release. She held my hand when she got to the part about the photo album. "I always wondered what they told you," she said. "Now I know they didn't just take you, they tried to erase me." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. A week later, we got an email from a woman named Danka, a social worker in Belgrade. She had read the article and recognized the name Mara Petrovic. She had worked at a refugee intake center in the early 2000s and remembered filing reports for families with missing children. "We kept those files," she wrote. "No one ever followed up. But we never threw them away." Attached were scanned documents forms with my mother's handwriting details about my age, height, the scarf I'd been wearing. And there, in the bottom corner of one form, was a grainy photo I'd never seen. It was me, sitting on a curb, hugging my knees, staring off to the side. It was dated 3 days after I disappeared. The image didn't answer any new questions, but it confirmed something deeper: that the search had always been real. That even when I'd been told to forget, someone had been trying to remember. My mother stared at the screen for a long time. "They told me no one saw you, that there were no witnesses. But here you are, on record, alone." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "But not forgotten." Lucas suggested we print the documents and have them framed, not for display, but for safekeeping. "Your truth deserves to live somewhere besides a cloud server," he said. So we did. We tucked them into a portfolio, one that we kept in a locked drawer beside our marriage certificate and birth records. Not as evidence, as restoration. Some weeks later, Na came over with a small envelope. Inside was a necklace, a thin silver chain with a tiny charm, an open book. "You were always the one writing essays and stories in school," she said. I didn't get it then. I do now. I smiled, clipped it around my neck, and thanked her. We weren't sisters by blood, but we shared something stranger: overlapping timelines, uneven truths, a fractured origin we were both learning to make peace with. That was the thing about starting over. It didn't erase what had come before. It just gave it room to breathe. And somehow that space made all the difference. Spring came early that year. The trees outside our apartment bloomed in waves of soft white and pale pink, and the air carried that clean, in-between scent of endings shifting into beginnings. I found myself waking up before the alarm, drawn to the quiet of morning, to the stillness that felt less like emptiness and more like clarity. One morning, while folding laundry, I came across a box of old family photos Lucas had stored away from his own childhood. As I sifted through them, birthdays, graduations, grainy beach snapshots, I found myself smiling at how simple it all looked. Not perfect, not airbrushed, but real. There were crooked smiles, bad haircuts, red eyes from camera flash. No one posed like they were advertising something. No one looked like they were performing. I thought about my old photo albums, what little remained of them, and how unnatural they'd always felt, how my smile never seemed to belong to the moment it was captured in. I reached for my phone and texted my mother. "Let's make new ones," she wrote back immediately. "Name the day." That weekend we drove out to a nearby park. Lucas brought his camera, but nothing professional, just something small, handheld, casual. My mother wore her favorite cardigan, the one with the patch on the elbow she refused to replace. Na joined us too, in jeans and sneakers, a rare sight for someone who'd always been obsessed with keeping up appearances. We didn't stage anything. We didn't rehearse. We just walked, sat under trees, told stories, passed sandwiches around, and let the moments unfold on their own. Lucas snapped pictures quietly, almost invisibly, capturing the laughter, the quiet glances, the crumbs on my shirt that Na refused to tell me about until it was too late. At one point, my mother leaned her head on my shoulder. Lucas caught that too. No one smiled for the camera, but in every frame we looked whole. Later that evening, Lucas showed me the photos. I expected to feel something sharp and ache, maybe, for all the years lost or the lies I once believed. But instead I felt still. The pictures didn't just show what we looked like. They showed who we were, when no one needed to prove anything. I printed several of them and placed them in a new album. On the first page, I wrote one sentence in my own handwriting. "This time I'm in every photo by choice." That line meant more to me than I could explain, because I'd spent so much of my life being inserted into narratives I hadn't written, smiling in frames I didn't choose. Now, every page in that book was mine, not because of how I looked, but because of how I felt when they were taken. Seen, believed, loved. Later that night, as Lucas and I sat on the couch, his arm around my shoulders, he asked, "When do you think you'll feel like you've fully come home?" I rested my head against him and whispered, "I think I already have." And for once, there was nothing left to say. Just peace. A few months after the wedding, I was invited to speak at a university seminar on trauma, identity, and displacement. Teresa had referred me, and at first I hesitated. I wasn't an expert. I wasn't a scholar. I was just someone who had survived something strange and complicated and painful. But the professor leading the seminar said that was exactly why they wanted me. "Your story doesn't come from a textbook," he said. "It comes from lived truth. And that's what our students need to hear." So I said yes. The lecture hall was modest, about 40 students, most of them young and wide-eyed, and still holding the soft parts of their world together. I stood at the front, my hands lightly gripping the podium, my notes barely touched. And I told them what happened. Not with dramatic pauses or carefully crafted quotes, just as it was. How a photo album cracked open a history I didn't know was mine. How love can be a disguise for control. How silence doesn't always mean peace. When I finished, the room stayed quiet for a moment. Then hands went up. One student asked, "What would you say to someone who thinks it's better not to dig too deep into the past?" I thought for a second. "I'd say you have every right not to," I replied. "But just know what you avoid doesn't disappear. It waits. And sometimes it waits until you're strong enough to face it." Another asked, "Do you forgive them?" I didn't rush my answer. I don't think forgiveness is something I owe. What I've chosen is release. I've let go of the weight. I'm not carrying them anymore. Afterward, a few students stayed behind to thank me. One girl said her grandmother had fled a war-torn region, and no one in the family ever spoke about it. "Maybe I'll ask her this time," she said. I smiled. "Just ask gently." That night, I walked home feeling something different. Not lighter exactly, but clearer. Like I wasn't carrying my story anymore, I was offering it. And in doing so, I was reclaiming every page. When I got home, Lucas was waiting with dinner already on the table. My mother joined us later for dessert. We didn't talk about the seminar. We just talked about her new recipe and whether or not the neighbor's cat was secretly living on our balcony. Normal things. Good things. I realized I wasn't living in the aftermath anymore. I was living. Not despite what had happened, but in full view of it. I'd taken the broken pieces, the lies, the gaps, and I'd turned them into something solid, something rooted, something true. The world hadn't made space for the version of me that vanished when I was 5, but I had. And that space was no longer haunted. It was home. Quiet, maybe, ordinary most days, but fully mine. And that mattered more than anything I'd lost. On the anniversary of the day I discovered the photos, I didn't plan anything. I didn't light candles or mark the date in my calendar. But my body remembered anyway. It started with a dream, Lucas and I walking through a hallway lined with doors, each one opening to a different version of my childhood. One door revealed a kitchen filled with laughter. Another a cold immigration office. One opened to nothing at all, just fog. I woke up with my heart-pounding breath, shallow the weight of something invisible pressing down on my chest. I sat up, walked to the kitchen and stared at the framed photo on the wall, the one of me holding a yellow flower. That little girl had no idea how far she'd have to travel just to arrive at herself. But she made it. I whispered, "You're safe now," and turned away. Later that morning, I walked to the bakery where my mother worked. She was behind the counter laughing with a regular customer flower dusted across her sleeves. When she saw me, she smiled like she always did now, with recognition, not obligation. "You want the usual?" she asked. "Surprise me," I said. She packed a small box and handed it to me. I didn't open it right away. I just held it as we talked about weekend plans and whether she should try a new lemon tart recipe. On the walk home, I stopped at the park, the same one where we had taken those unposed photos months earlier. I sat on the same bench under the same tree. For a moment, I let the silence stretch. Then I pulled out the pastries. Inside were 2 small danishes, and nestled between them a folded note. In her handwriting, "You are not what was done to you. You are what you chose to become." I closed my eyes, let the wind move through me. I thought about all the versions of myself that had existed: the smiling child in altered photos, the quiet teen who never asked questions, the woman gasping for air on the kitchen floor with memory flooding back like a broken dam. And then the version I was now. Whole. Not perfect, but mine. Later that evening, Lucas and I sat on the balcony wrapped in a blanket, the city below buzzing like a distant memory. "Do you still think about them?" he asked. I knew who he meant. "Not often," I said. "And when I do, it's quieter. Like background noise instead of a siren." He nodded, then took my hand. We didn't say anything else. We didn't need to. I had learned that closure isn't always a door slamming shut. Sometimes it's a window slowly opening, letting in air you didn't realize you'd been holding your breath against. Sometimes it's a letter burned, a name reclaimed, a photo taken on your own terms. And sometimes it's just this: a quiet evening, a steady hand in yours, a life you no longer have to explain. I didn't just survive what was done to me. I reshaped it. I named it. And in doing so, I made room for joy. Lasting, unborrowed joy. The kind you don't have to prove. The kind you simply live. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that truth has a quiet but undeniable weight. You can carry it unknowingly for years, mistaking it for something else: shame, confusion, loneliness. But when you finally name it, when you finally face it, it no longer owns you. My life didn't begin in a photo album or a forged document. It began the moment I chose to reclaim it. If you've ever felt like a stranger in your own story, know this: it's never too late to rewrite the ending. The past may shape you, but it doesn't define you. Who you become, that's yours. All yours. And that truth, once held, can never be taken from you again.